Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Gooey's Dungeon Dive, the podcast where I, Gooey, rank every dungeon in The Legend of Zelda. And today we're continuing our quest through Link's Awakening, and we're ranking Level 3, Key Cavern. After receiving our last message directing us towards the prairie, we find ourselves exploring Yukuku Prairie. Here we find the villa of a frog-loving man named Richard. He tells us that he used to be the prince of Gauntlet Castle until all of his servants went berserk. He offers us a key to the next dungeon in exchange for 5 golden leaves that he left behind while fleeing the castle. After gaining secret entry into the castle with a little help from a monkey named Kiki, and defeating all of the enemies within, including a vicious ball and chain trooper, we are able to gain the 5 leaves. Richard, who's very excited about this, gives us access to Pothole Field, in which we can find a secret spot in which we can dig to give us the slime key, which opens the way to Key Cavern. Now, Key Cavern is shaped like, you guessed it, a key. And that is certainly a big theme within this dungeon. For instance, one room you encounter early on in the first portion of the dungeon has 4 locked doors. Only one of these doors actually leads further into the progression of this dungeon, while the others are sort of dead ends, but each one of these ways offers up a key so that you can continue exploring. The other way this dungeon heavily features keys is that in the second portion after that, the path that you need to head down to go to the Nightmare Chamber is actually blocked off by many key blocks, and you'll have to seek out many keys all over the dungeon to actually progress beyond this area. And with these 2 portions, you have the layout, really, of the whole dungeon. Again, it's not too complicated, but with all these little twists, it gives it sort of challenge if you don't know exactly what you're doing. In that first portion I mentioned, when you are met with the 4 locked doors, the north door, it doesn't just give you a key, it's also got an owl statue without a beak, and a crystal switch. Now, the switch, it gives you some potential backtracking that's optional. You can go back to the earlier area of the dungeon, and you can find the map in the stone beak, which, if you want to use the stone beak, you just saw a room you can use it in. So there's already some, again, it's optional for these kind of hints and for the map and stuff, but obviously it's very helpful for a new player. So I'm really in favor of that. I do love that. Now, the second portion of the dungeon reminds me a little bit of Tail Cave in that it's a little bit more open, but you've got a lot of different options, and of course even more here because we're later into the game. And the main objective in this area is in the center where you have your 4 key blocks, and then there's like chambers wrapped around it. There's some obvious stuff you can pick up, obvious like keys that you'll find right away, and you can find the compass pretty easily here, which will help you find the rest of the chests you need and some optional chests too. And you can, of course, find a lot of the stuff in any order, even some of the more involved stuff. We definitely get a little bit more of an involved lesson in bombing here for some of the other obstacles, which is kind of cool. I thought this was a great use of bombing. There's, the obvious bombing walls, classic Zelda stuff here. There's an owl statue actually in a room that tells you to poke your sword on suspicious walls and use the noise to help find locations where you can bomb the wall and create a new path. This is a great room to teach you because in this very room there's tiles on the floor that create an arrow pointing right to a spot on the wall that you can bomb. And so for a first time kind of like light tutorial, I think that's great. If you go through that area and are in the next room, then you'll actually see a cracked part of the wall there that goes on the west side that goes to another area that you could access before, but you couldn't see the cracked portion on the other side, and that's kind of neat. And if you go back around, or if you're in that room to the west or whatever, you'll notice that the pathway is between 2 torches. So it kind of is teaching you that, like, hey, some of these spots, they'll be a little less suspicious than like a giant arrow on the ground. So you know, it's something you can like observe and look out for, as opposed to just expecting the game to give you a very over-the-top hint. Another spot that takes advantage of this idea is a room in which, from a higher level, you can see a cracked spot on the other side of the compass room, but in the actual room with the compass you can't see it. This requires you to kind of remember that and venture, you know, you got to venture around now with this new knowledge, and you bomb the wall, which gives you another key. So that's you know, a nice neat little navigational puzzle there. The final test, though, with the bombing is probably the mini boss, which are called Dodongo snakes, I believe. And, you know, if you fought a Dodongo, or not, I guess there's an owl statue in here that gives you a hint on how to beat them, though it's a little less fun of a hint than Dodongo dislikes smoke, but the message is still the same there. It basically tells you got to use bombs to defeat them, and so it's kind of a fun little test of your bombing ability. It's mostly just place it in front of their mouths, you know. Yeah, it's neat. It's a neat little fight. After defeating the Dodongos, we're gifted with the dungeon item, which is the Pegasus boots. We've seen these before, of course, in A Link to the Past, and they allow you to dash quickly across the screen, and it brings us to another phase. It's kind of mixed in with the bomb phase, depending on the order you do things, but it's the, you know, now we've got the item, so it opens up all these item puzzles, you know, depending on what you've done, of course. It's cool, because it's in, again, it's like kind of a non-linear fashion, too, with what you can pick up here. You can take the warp that the Dodongo snakes left back to the, like, entrance of the dungeon. There's a room just to the right with this weird enemy called the Vacuum Mouth that, like, pushes you and pulls you or whatever, depending on the dungeon it's in. But here it'll push you off the edge. But now you can, with the Pegasus boots, you can just dash across the room and kill it real quick to pick up a key, which is, I think, pretty neat, like that you can encounter that super early and just be like, how do I defeat this thing? I definitely have a lot of memories as a kid of trying to like jump over and kill it. So that key gives you the last one if you found all the other ones that you would need to get to the boss chamber. Of course, you could have to go look for more. There's also some like goodies you can collect here in the beginning portion with the Pegasus boots, which I always love some optional goodies. But of course, to get into the Nightmare Chamber itself, which you could go all the way up to right now, but you could also not have the Nightmare Key. And there's one chest that can be seen from a different room on a lower level that, you know, it obviously must be it if you haven't gotten it already. The big Pegasus boot puzzle of this dungeon, I think, is required to get this. You can sort of follow the path into the lower room to see, like, this is how you get to it, but the only problem is there is a huge gap that's way too large to jump over with the Rock's Feather that you have to jump over to get to it. And if you can't figure out what to do, there's an owl statue in the dungeon that says, "Far away, do not fear, dash and fly." Hopefully that's enough of a hint, I think it is, to tell you that you need to combine the Pegasus boots and the Rock's Feather to jump even further across the pit to get to the key. I think this is really clever, really fun, great. I love the concept of combining the items like that. Yeah, it rocks. This game rocks for that. So if you got the key and you got all the things you need, the final path to the Nightmare's Lair gives a couple fun more opportunities to use the Pegasus boots, kind of one right after the other, which is kind of a nice little fun Pegasus boot gauntlet. First we got the Mario theme again, going underground, and this time there's a Womp. I think Thwomp? It's a Womp. This guy is blocking the path. He'll crush you if you try to go under him, but if you jump into him, you'll shatter him, you know, he'll fall to the ground, it'll make a little platform you can jump on. You know, pretty cute. And then you jump over that, and then you got another pit of spikes to jump over, and there's a piranha plant there. Nice little underground section. But the room you come up in has all these weird little rock things that we couldn't get by before, but now they can be busted by dashing into them. And it's got all these enemies in there that you encounter a bunch earlier in the dungeon that, depending on the version of the game you're playing, they can be kind of a pain. They're called Parods, I think. They're some weird little guys. They normally teleport away from you when you get near them, but with this now you can just dash right into them. So it's kind of just another little satisfying, like, you know, these guys were a pain before, but now they're a piece of cake. One thing I think that's like a little cherry on top for this dungeon for me is that in the final room, right before the nightmare battle, it gives you another key. And this is, of course, and if you missed going to any of those troll rooms earlier in the dungeon and you want to go back and check them out, I could see how if someone made it here and they didn't have like the nightmare key, this might cause them to backtrack. Though I doubt you would get this far and not realize how to get the nightmare key. But either way, those rooms are a great troll overall, I think. And I guess this dungeon does have like a little stinker vibe to it, with all those rooms, and there's like a chest in the dungeon that just has a Zol in it that just kind of trolls you. And I guess speaking of like bombs and enemies, there's these bomb type guys you hit with your sword and they bounce around like crazy, and there's these other ones who you hit them and they like grin at you and count down and run at you and explode. So there's kind of that element too. It all actually does feel kind of cohesive in an interesting way. Even the music is a little mischievous. We haven't really talked about the music, but I do like it a lot. The nightmare within the dungeon is kind of a little stinker too. I guess keeping the theme from Genie alive. You go into his chamber and it's completely empty, but he says on the screen, he goes, "Neener, neener, you can't find me," yeah, or whatever. And Zols start falling down from the ceiling, which I think is a nice little touch. And at this point, we've used the Pegasus shoes enough that we should know you gotta slam into the wall to knock this guy off the ceiling. This guy dropping all the slime is actually Slime Eye, and he's a big set of slimy eyes. The way to beat him, it's fairly simple. You slash at his eyes and separate them, and once they're separated enough, you dash in between to split them apart, and then make them vulnerable. And then there are two separate eyes you gotta kind of kill. It's kind of like Vitreous more. It's kind of like the eyeballs from A Link to the Past, let's just say. But yeah, it's a fun little fight. So yeah, we defeat him. We head to the final chamber. We pick up the Sea Lily Bell. Its tune, of course, fades us into that white light. We're bathed in the white light, and on the screen we see the words, "Waterfall. It is hidden in the waterfall." Nice little tease there. And yeah, I think I was really surprised overall this time around, and I really agonized trying to rank this dungeon. Now, I liked it a lot. I liked it more than Tail Cave, if we're just comparing it to the game. It had a lot of things that I already liked about Tail Cave, but expanded upon. It is a nice progression from there. So it obviously right away goes above that. And I've just been struggling on where I want to put it after that. Like, I was thinking like Hyrule Castle. Like, I know not everyone agrees with me, but I just love it thematically in the game of A Link to the Past. It's so good. But, I don't know. I like this one as a dungeon a little bit more, so I would put it above that. And then what's really killing me here is Swamp Palace. I think Swamp Palace is great. It has like kind of a more specific puzzle theme going on in Swamp Palace with the floor switches and raising the water level. It should be given props, obviously, for kind of paving the way for like the water dungeon concept. It's not surprising, like a water video game level. It's not surprising, but it is the first one really to do it. So I do feel like, yeah, that's a really strong contender too. Everything from here on out in the top are all dungeons I do really love. But turns out on this playthrough, like especially just looking at the layout and kind of the order you can do things and like all the puzzles with Key Cavern, I actually think they're really good. And like, I don't know, just that the key theme is so unique, you know, I think more unique than what becomes of the water theme. So, I mean, honestly, I think I gotta put it above Swamp Palace too, which is a great dungeon. Swamp Palace is a really solid, tight dungeon, so don't get me wrong, but I do really like Key Cavern. Now, I think I gotta stop here at Skull Woods. I do love Skull Woods, and if we're talking about uniqueness, I think, I mean, they ended up doing Skull Woods again in A Link Between Worlds, but I feel like that is such a unique dungeon where you're like weaving in and out of the overworld. Like, that is so cool. So I think Key Cavern stops here. I will say, like, I love the Pegasus boot use in this. It wasn't just like it's never just, the path is blocking you, you need X item, boom. Like, you still have this element of like, you gotta run and you gotta time your jump and all this kind of stuff. Obviously, like the stuff like, you just gotta use it to knock the womp down is a little obvious, but that's a cute puzzle. But anyway, I think overall it should get a lot of points for its item usage, really more so than Swamp Palace or like Skull Woods. But I think between those two, we found a nice placement for it. And yeah, I think like the Link's Awakening dungeons, they're looking real strong to me, because we still have many more to go from here. So I'm really curious as to where they'll slot in, because I did not expect to love Key Cavern as much as I did, but after playing it again, looking at it closely, I really do appreciate this dungeon. So there we have it. There's my ranking. Looking good for Link's Awakening. And thanks to everyone for watching, and I will see you again next week.